A missile is climbing toward you at 3 times the speed of sound. You have no guns, no flares that will help. Your entire defense, the only move in the book, is to push the throttle forward and leave it behind. That was the actual doctrine for the fastest airplane ever built. It was called the A-12, and later the SR-71 Blackbird. Lockheed's secret workshop, the Skunk Works, built it for the CIA. It cruised faster than 2,200 miles an hour, higher than 85,000 feet, and in 30 years of flying, not one was ever shot down. But speed is not even the strange part. The strange part is that this plane officially did not exist for almost half a century, and the metal it was made of, the CIA secretly bought from the one country it was built to spy on. So how do you build a machine nothing on Earth can catch and then hide it in plain sight for 45 years? Stay with me. By the end, you will understand exactly how they pulled it off, and the one quiet purchase that makes the whole story almost unbelievable. Start in 1960. America had a problem. Its best spy plane, the U-2, had just been shot down over the Soviet Union. Flying high was no longer enough. If you cannot fly out of reach, you have to fly out of range, by being too fast to touch. So the CIA went to one man, Kelly Johnson, the engineer who ran the Skunk Works, the same team that built the U-2. His brief was close to insane. Build a plane that cruises at Mach 3.2, that is over 3 times the speed of sound, fast enough to cross the entire United States in about an hour. Therefore, everything had to be invented from scratch. And the first enemy was not the Soviets. It was heat. Here's the problem nobody outside that building understood yet. When you push metal through the air that fast, friction turns the whole plane into an oven. The skin of the Blackbird in flight reaches somewhere between 600 and 900 degrees. Aluminum, the metal almost every aircraft is made of, would go soft and fail. The plane would melt itself. So Johnson made a radical call: build it out of titanium. Titanium shrugs off that heat. But in 1960, titanium was rare, expensive, and brutally hard to machine. Tools shattered on it, and America did not have nearly enough of the high-grade ore. So, who did? The Soviet Union. The single largest supplier on the planet was the exact country this plane was being built to photograph. Now think about the corner they were in. You cannot build the world's most secret spy plane if you walk up to your enemy and ask to buy 400 tons of the metal you need. Therefore, the CIA did the only thing it could. It hid. According to Ben Rich, the engineer who later ran the Skunk Works, the agency set up front companies and dummy buyers in other countries and quietly bought the titanium straight from the USSR. In his words, the Russians never had the faintest idea they were helping build the airplane that would spend the next decade spying on them. Sit with that. The most expensive secret in American aviation was made of Soviet metal, bought with a fake name. That is the black budget at work. The money is invisible, so the impossible becomes a paperwork problem. And the plane they built with it was unlike anything before or since. About 85% of it was titanium. Long, flat blades ran down each side of the nose called chines. They were not just for lift. They were one of the first serious attempts to make an aircraft harder to see on radar, bouncing less of the signal back. The Blackbird was, in a quiet way, the grandfather of every stealth plane that came after. But here is my favorite detail, because it sounds like a flaw and is actually genius. On the ground, the Blackbird leaked fuel, constantly. It would sit on the runway in a puddle of its own gas. That was on purpose. The panels of the plane were built to fit loosely while it was cold, because everyone knew that at speed, the heat would make the whole airframe expand and grow several inches longer. Only then, hot and stretched tight, would the panels seal. So they fueled it loose, let it leak, and let it close itself up in the sky. And the fuel itself was special. It was so stable you could drop a lit match into a puddle of it and the match would go out. They needed that, because a normal fuel near that much heat is a bomb. That same fuel was also pumped through the airframe to soak up heat and cool the electronics before it ever got burned. Every part of this plane was doing 2 jobs at once. Even the engines cheated. At low speed, they ran like normal jets. But, past a certain point, they quietly rerouted the air and started behaving like a completely different kind of engine, where the inlet at the front, not the spinning core, produced most of the power. The faster it went, the more the plane became a giant ramjet wrapped around a jet. It was, in the most literal sense, an aircraft that worked better the harder you pushed it. So now you have this black, leaking Soviet metal machine that grows when it flies and speeds up to survive. The question is, did it actually work? And the answer is the part that still does not feel real. Take the missile problem. When a surface-to-air missile locked on and launched, the Blackbird crew did not dive or twist or panic. The training was simple. Speed up. Climb. The missile would burn all its energy trying to correct its aim, and it would run out long before it reached them. Over the skies of Vietnam, by the count we can verify, around 800 of those missiles were fired at these planes. Hits, 0. Across the entire program, not a single one was ever lost to enemy fire. The losses it did suffer were accidents, the price of flying at the edge of space in a machine no one had ever built before. And it set records doing it. On one day in 1976, an SR-71 was clocked at 2,193 miles an hour, and another reached a sustained 85,000 feet. Those records were set 50 years ago. As of today, they have never been broken. Nothing that breathes air and carries a human has ever flown faster. But none of that speed mattered if anyone knew the plane existed. And keeping that secret meant the people flying it lived a strange double life. Picture it. It is 1967. A pilot named Meli Voivodich straps into a full pressure suit, basically a spacesuit, because at 80,000 feet the air is so thin it would kill him in seconds. He lifts off from Okinawa in heavy rain he has never flown the plane in before, climbs to the edge of the sky, and runs a single pass over North Vietnam at over 3 times the speed of sound. 3 hours and 39 minutes later, he lands. His film answers a question that had the whole country on edge, and it does it without firing a shot. That was the job. Go higher and faster than anyone alive, see everything, touch nothing, and tell no one you were there. These pilots were national heroes who could not tell their neighbors what they did for a living. And the suits they wore tell you just how close to space this really was. They were full pressure suits, built by the same company with the same hardware that would later dress NASA's astronauts. Here is the proof. When the very first Space Shuttle launched, a flaw turned up in NASA's own suits at the last minute, so the crew borrowed pressure suits straight from the Blackbird program. The first humans to ride the shuttle into orbit wore the spy plane's clothes. One of those pilots, a man named Brian Schul, had survived a crash and severe burns years earlier, fought his way back through surgery after surgery, and then talked his way into the cockpit of the fastest plane on Earth. He logged more than 500 hours in it. The people who flew this thing were not ordinary, and it cost some of them everything. In June of 1968, a pilot named Jack Weeks took an A-12 out over the Pacific near the Philippines. Months earlier, Jack was the man who had found the captured American ship, the USS Pueblo, on a single overflight. He was one of the best. On this flight, his plane suffered what investigators believe was a catastrophic engine failure. No trace of Jack or his aircraft was ever found, and because the program was secret, his story was secret too. A man does one of the hardest jobs his country has ever asked of anyone, and for decades, the world is not even allowed to know his plane was real. That is the weight under all of this. The secrecy that kept them safe also kept them invisible. So how long did it stay hidden? This is the number that gets me. The very existence of these planes was such a closely held thing that when President Johnson finally went on television in 1964, he deliberately used the wrong name for it to protect the real program underneath. The public got a decoy. The A-12 first flew in 1962, but the CIA did not fully declassify the program, the real story, the documents, the missions, until 2007. That is 45 years. 2 entire generations of Americans lived and died, never knowing the most extraordinary airplane their country ever built was sitting in a hangar in the Nevada desert. This was not a rumor that got out. This was a machine that broke every record we have, made of enemy metal, flown by ghosts, and kept in the dark for almost half a century. On purpose. And that is the real lesson of the black budget. It is not just about hiding money. It is about what that hidden money can build when no one is allowed to ask questions. A plane that outran missiles by simply refusing to slow down, bought, in part, from the very country it was built to watch. The Blackbirds sit in museums now. You can stand under one. And if you look closely at the floor beneath it, some of them are still leaking, 50 years later, just like they were designed to. If you want the next thing they built in the dark, the next machine that officially did not exist, hit subscribe so the next secret is one you get to see in the light. So here is my question for you. Of everything they hid, what do you think is still classified right now? Tell me in the comments. See you in the next one.